In the exhibition The Presence of Absence, Wollheim's philosophy of art and psychoanalysis comes together with the work of collage artist Patrice Moor. 2 weeks before Moor's second birthday, her mother died suddenly from a hereditary heart condition. Moor's collages set together family photographs, bodily images, and stitching to compose works that both express and depict a consciousness of trauma before language.
Well, about 18 months ago, I had an email from Patrice saying that she'd been given my name as a philosopher who knew something about philosophy of psychoanalysis and of art. She had a collection of collages that she wanted to present as a collection in its own right, but with a commentary, a sort of philosophical psychoanalytic commentary. And then she came, visited, and showed me some of her images. And it coincided with the time when my little research group was doing some quite in-depth work, I suppose, on Wollheim, on Richard Wollheim. And I saw a connection between some of Wollheim's philosophy and these images of Patrice's, which, although I didn't realize it at the time, was a unusual thing to have got hold of, because Wollheim doesn't, of course, write about collage at all. He does write about modern art quite a lot, but not about collage. So there's a kind of additional explanatory challenge here, or expository challenge, to find out more about how Wollheim's own philosophy of art, which is quite developed in some ways and quite heavily critiqued in some ways, how much that might generalize to something like collage. It devotes 2 chapters of The Thread of Life, pretty much, to what he's calling iconic mental states, which are fantasies, dreams, experiential memories, and effectively what he calls central imagining, when we identify with somebody. Well, his study of these mental states is there to capture, is there causal power? The fact that if you are in the throes of a certain sort of memory, a certain sort of identification, a certain sort of fantasy, this will actually eventuate in actions which in some way do reflect the content of that state, but often in a very distorted way, and a very powerful way, and a way that it's very difficult to understand, to intervene in, and to deflect or to manage, certainly to manage rationally.
I've been doing collages for a long time, so that's probably, when I say long time, probably 20 years, because I've always liked collages and because I'm very interested in the process and I'm very interested in surrealism. I've always been very drawn to surrealism and the stream of consciousness. I never could find what I wanted to do with them initially. It took me a long time to be able to sort of work with them. Suddenly, because I started doing things that were much more personal rather than ideas-led, and I think that was the key. I was very much in touch with my family in Holland through Zoom and various other means, probably more because of the lockdown as well. And then I asked them to send me family photos, and again that was another springboard to more material, more ideas, and kind of furthering my ideas of what I wanted to do. Initially, I was going to use the actual photographs, that I felt upset at the idea of cutting them up. And then I realized that the whole process of photocopying the photographs kind of removed it. It created another veil between me and it created a kind of dreamlike quality, something that lent itself rather well to the feelings, and something out of reach, less graspable. And I think that, these are all thoughts that I've had subsequently, because at the time I wasn't really thinking, I was responding to things and then making and making and making. And I think there was a huge amount of making. And now it's all the things I'm saying are really looking back on it, but not things I was thinking necessarily very consciously at the time. And I found also the process of cutting very therapeutic, very pleasant, very easy. And by having a whole pile of cuttings in front of me, I would kind of find things that went together that I hadn't thought of before. But I think that the whole thing is very unconscious, because often I think I've said this to you before, I make collages when I'm talking to people on the phone or doing almost not thinking. And the not thinking seems to promote the work in some way. So there's a huge amount of unconscious decisions that I've made. That the sewing is a form of repair work that does feel very much like I'm repairing something.
You mentioned Louise Bourgeois in connection with the needle.
Yeah, then Louise Bourgeois said the needle was an instrument of repair or something like that, and I really feel that. So it's the business of cutting and disconnecting things, then reconnecting and making new connections, and then the sewing seems to be like the fine. Well, the bottom part of the jaw is missing.
This bit, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So the bottom, my skull doesn't have a bottom jaw.
No.
So that it kind of creates a very different feeling, indeed. And I mean, I see all sorts of things in that skull, which, because I've worked with it for so many years, sometimes it looks to me like a child's face. It almost looks like that to me. Other times it looks to me like, a woman's face. But it is easier to kind of, because it's missing the bottom jaw, it's kind of easier to be just like a representative of something rather than something very specific. There is a playfulness about making the collages. I think I've got the dominant ones are the obvious. They're Frida Kahlo, Louise Bourgeois, and Tracy Emin, in terms of being the subject of the work and through the work being able to process difficult emotions and one's relationship with life.
But what you've just been saying makes me think, among other things, of Richard Wollheim, the philosopher whose work, your work immediately brought to mind. And what you're saying there is, interestingly, echoes or reflects or is resonant with his preferred method of looking at a painting, which was to sit and look at it for a very long time. The exact length of time reported varies from between 1 hour and 3 hours, but it's a sort of legend in the literature that he would sit there, and he describes how he waits until a lot of unnecessary things have dropped away, and he becomes much more aware of something in the painting, which is a feeling of something like connectedness, I think.